Your Sharpie's done, your pencil has been erased, and now it's time to move on to coloring your drawing. We're going to color large areas with watercolor paint. You should have a set of watercolor paints in your art packet. You're also going to need a cup of water, a rag for drying off your brush, and your paintbrush. The first step in this process is waking up your watercolor paints. They're naturally dry. We need to add water to them in order to be able to paint. I'm going to paint the sky first, so what I'm going to do is dip my brush in the water and drop a couple drops into my blue paint. Just dragging it on the edge of the little well where the blue is. I'm going to spread it out in the whole well and add more water till the well is relatively full. I'll let it sit for a second and then mix it up. It should get nice and cloudy. Now I'm going to paint my sky with overlapping strokes, starting in the corner and always touching the wet areas with my brush when I'm depositing new paint. Try to be precise, but to work quickly. The quicker you work, the more even your paint is going to be. A tiny little paint on my buildings will be okay. Just try to make sure you don't paint over a large area, because that will be very difficult to color over. You may find you need to add more water to your well about halfway through this process. If you notice the paint is going on really dark, you can add water directly to your paper, and that will help tone down the color a little bit and make it lighter. You want to avoid adding too much water and having big puddles of water on your paper, because that makes your paper weak and it's liable to rip. I'm going to add some water to these areas that look patchy to try to smooth them out a little bit. A little bit of patchiness is okay because it will end up looking like clouds. I also need to do these areas in between the slats of the railing. Once you've done your sky, you're ready to move on to any grass areas. Rinse out your brush thoroughly and dry it off before moving to the next color. I'll add water to my green to wake it up, just like I did with the blue. Spread it out in the well. Wait a couple seconds, and then stir it up till it's nice and cloudy. If your green is too light, you can add more of the paint to it to make it darker. To get into tiny areas, you can use the tip of your brush, or if you're using a flat brush, the corner right here. One of the tricky things about watercolor is that you can't paint right next to it while it's wet. If you do, unfortunately, your wet watercolor will bleed into your other wet watercolor, and you'll end up with mixed colors or a big patch of a different color where you didn't want it. So I would do the road next, because it doesn't really touch the sky or the grass. The more water you use, the more light gray your road will look. The less water you use, the more black it will look. I was a little reckless with my paint and painted over some of my stripes, so I need to be more cautious in the future. I'm going to rinse out my brush, and now I need to think about my building colors. One thing you're going to have to bear in mind with your buildings is you cannot paint next to a wet area. Even if it's just a little bit wet, when your wet watercolor touches another wet watercolor, they're going to bleed together. To avoid that, you want to start in an area that's pretty cut off from your blue and your green. I'm going to begin with this building because there's only a tiny bit here that touches the green. This is a fairly pale brown, and I'm going to leave it like that because I want my buildings to be different colors. So I could do some that are very light and others that are darker. This side is also pretty safe. It does have a little blue up here that I need to be careful of, so I'll start over here and then begin at the bottom and work my way up. I'm going to try to make this building darker than this one by using less water and more of the paint. Here's what I mean. As planned, I'm going to start here at the bottom where my green is mostly dry and work my way up to that little wet spot. You can see how much darker this building looks than the first one I painted. I noticed my green wasn't quite dry and I ended up smudging it all over my car and my house. There's nothing I can do about that except be way more careful in the future. There are other ways to alter the color too. To change this color, I can put a different color on top. I need to be cautious about how much water I add because I don't want to weaken the paper. Do you see how I've managed to change the color of that building by adding another color? Continue to carefully paint your buildings, taking care not to smudge your wet paint like I did. Now that you've painted your sky, your grass, and your buildings, we're going to let everything dry. We'll come back and do our finishing touches with colored pencil.